Picture this. For centuries, the shadow of just one single city stretched all the way across the ancient world, completely transforming scattered tribes and ancient kingdoms into one unified, absolutely staggering expanse. But the true story of the Roman Empire isn't just some basic tale of marching legions and conquered lands. No, beneath all those beautiful marble monuments and the really dramatic, larger-than-life stories of the emperors, there lay a deeply sophisticated machinery of order. You see, Rome rose up not merely as a conquering force, but as an unparalleled administrative behemoth. It actually forged a blueprint for civilization, one that managed to conquer the incredibly tough geography of the Mediterranean and incredibly outlasted the empire itself.
So, what was Rome really? At its absolute core, it was a system designed for turning raw, brute force into enduring order. Now, sure, plenty of ancient societies could win a battle or sack a city. But short-term military dominance, that's inherently fragile. Just think about Alexander the Great. He forges absolutely massive empire through sheer relentless conquest, only to see the whole thing practically shatter the second he died. Rome's true historical significance actually lay in its unique ability to take the absolute chaos of conquest and translate it into a durable, repeatable structure. Over centuries of constant adaptation, first the Republic, and then later the Empire, built administrative rules and civic institutions. And these institutions allowed their control to become a permanent reality, one that survived civil wars, endless political assassinations, and the passing of countless generations.
Now, holding on to this immense territorial control didn't happen by magic. It rested on four interlocking pillars: military force, law, infrastructure, and identity. Now, separately, these were just standard tools of statecraft, but put them together, they formed a highly calibrated engine of expansion that made Roman dominion sustainable for centuries. From the freezing, rain-swept frontiers of Britannia all the way down to the sun-baked deserts of Syria, these four forces worked in perfect concert. They bound literally millions of subjects spread across 3 different continents into a single, highly cohesive political entity.
Let's start with the most obvious one. The highly visible front edge of this machine was, of course, the Roman legion. Historically speaking, these heavily armored, highly disciplined units were the brutal instrument that seized territory, crushed dissent, and deterred foreign incursions. Yet the true power of the Roman military wasn't just in its battlefield tactics. It was in its deep, seamless integration with the state's supply lines and engineering corps. You see, a Roman legion didn't just win a battle, pack up, and leave. No way, they stayed. They built forts, established permanent supply depots, and physically enforced the borders. They literally transformed a temporary military victory into a permanent territorial acquisition.
But you can't just rule with swords forever. Right behind the bronze shields of the military lay an invisible yet honestly equally formidable framework: Roman law. Rome systematically replaced the unpredictable whims of local warlords with structured, organized governance. By establishing written, recognizable rules, starting from the ancient 12 tables in the early Republic all the way up to the incredibly complex provincial edicts of the imperial era, they codified everyday human interaction. And let's be honest, predictable power is just far easier for people to endure than random tyranny. By putting legal codes, courts, and standardized civic processes into place, Rome made obedience to the state feel routine. It became a structure. And that fostered a really profound, centuries-long stability.
So we have the law and we have the military. Now, all of that authority had to be bound together by a vast physical skeleton. We're talking about an unprecedented network of stone-paved arteries, like the incredibly famous Via Appia, along with massive deep-water ports and these towering aqueducts that physically conquered the hostile geography of the ancient world. A Roman road literally shortened the distance between the emperors sitting in Rome and the most distant, dangerous frontiers. It meant that marching soldiers, vital tax revenues, bustling trade, and official imperial decrees could all flow efficiently. It physically stitched a massive, incredibly diverse landscape into one controllable, fully interconnected unit.
And then there's the glue holding the whole system together: identity. This is perhaps Rome's most historically significant strategy of all. Unlike rival empires that treated conquered subjects as permanent outsiders or just mere resources to be extracted, Rome actively integrated local populations. They did this by gradually extending the highly coveted prize of full Roman citizenship. Often, this started as a reward for auxiliary soldiers or really loyal local magistrates. By doing this, they successfully layered Latin culture and civic pride right over the top of indigenous customs. By turning former enemies into active participants and beneficiaries within the system, they ensured that subjects from Hispania all the way to Asia Minor actually had a vested interest in preserving the empire.
Of course, managing this vast expanse day to day was a massive undertaking. It required a very rigid hierarchy of dependence. Right at the top, you had the emperor, acting as a singular symbol of unity and ultimate authority across the civilized world. But the emperor obviously couldn't rule alone, so power was delegated outward to provincial governors. These were usually seasoned military men or wealthy patricians, and they managed the regional armies. Then those governors leaned heavily on local city councils and provincial elites to actually collect the taxes and keep order among the ordinary people. It was a brilliant chain of administration. Every single layer relied on the one right above it for legitimacy and the one right below it for resources. But keeping that hierarchy intact, that meant the survival of the empire depended on a constant, really delicate calibration of coercion and cooperation. If you rebelled, you met the devastating hard edge of military annihilation. Cities were razed to the ground, entire populations were enslaved, and leaders were executed. It was brutal. Yet pure force is incredibly unsustainably expensive to maintain over millions of square miles. So Rome heavily incentivized loyalty. They balanced the sheer terror of the legions with the sweet allure of cooperation. They offered local elites elevated social status, eventual citizenship, access to these vast Mediterranean trade networks, and heavy military protection against rival tribes. It was this perfectly calculated, constant formula of pressure and reward.
Let's put that into perspective by looking at a conquered province. In historical terms, whether it was the incredibly grain-rich fields of Egypt, the deep mining regions of Britannia, or the wild tribal lands of Gaul, a province was a meticulously managed relationship. Yes, these provinces were heavily taxed, and yes, they were absolutely required to supply auxiliary troops to fuel that imperial war machine. But in exchange, they got the security of the Pax Romana, they got structural order, legal frameworks, and direct access to the wealthiest trade networks the world had literally ever seen. So a province wasn't merely a victim of conquest, it was actually plugged directly into a massive wealth-generating apparatus. Now, maintaining that massive apparatus required a very precise equilibrium of 4 major needs. First up, physical control. The army ensured this, preventing disorder and guarding those huge frontiers against Germanic tribes and Parthian armies. Second, they needed cooperation. Integrating local elites secured this, which kept the administrative costs of direct boots-on-the-ground rule nice and low. Third, movement. Those vast road networks provided the logistical speed required to connect the frontiers and deploy troops at a moment's notice. And finally, legitimacy. The legal system established the normality needed to make Roman rule feel expected and even sustainable to the millions of conquered populaces. Take any one of those elements away, and imperial collapse was basically guaranteed.
Yet, as we know, every single system possesses inherent vulnerabilities. And here's the crazy part. The very mechanisms that fueled Rome's meteoric rise eventually created a totally crushing economic burden. This really came to a head in the deep instability of the crisis of the 3rd century. Think about it. Expanding borders demanded more legions to garrison those new territories, while larger armies required vastly more coin to prevent the soldiers from mutinying. To get that coin, Rome was forced to impose heavier, genuinely crushing taxation upon the provinces. And what does a crippling tax burden do? It breeds intense resentment and economic stagnation, which inevitably sparks internal rebellions. And ironically, those rebellions required even more soldiers to suppress. The very engine of their success slowly morphed into an inescapable trap.
So we have to ask, what actually happens when a system like this can no longer hold its own balance? Well, when the borders finally stopped expanding, that constant, vital influx of new wealth and plunder completely ceased. But the immense, towering costs of maintaining the military, those absolutely remained. As the sheer burden of taxation literally broke the back of the agrarian economy, the carefully constructed layers of administration began to fracture. That delicate balance between force, infrastructure, and identity collapsed under its own massive, unsustainable weight. Regional governors started turning their armies inward to try and claim the throne for themselves. Endless civil wars completely drained the treasury, and those once impenetrable frontiers finally weakened, totally setting the stage for the catastrophic division and eventual fragmentation of the Western Empire. Ultimately, Rome's really enduring historical legacy is that it serves as an unparalleled blueprint for statecraft. Long after the Western Empire fell into ruin, its ghosts remained. Rome was essentially still dictating to subsequent kings, emperors, and popes exactly how to organize power, how to codify laws, and how to conquer huge distances. The language of Rome literally became the language of European diplomacy. Its laws became the absolute foundation of Western jurisprudence.
The story of Rome is absolutely fascinating, and it leaves us with a really profound historical question to ponder. Was the fall of this great empire a failure of its leaders? Or was the ultimate collapse simply the inevitable destiny of a machine that was built to grow until it ultimately destroyed itself?